Lawyers, what's the best way you've seen someone blow a court case? Viewers Edition. Story 1. I had jury duty this past summer on a domestic abuse and battery case. Police had body cam footage with audio of a phone call between the testifying officer and the defendant. On the footage, the testifying officer asked the defendant if he was previously at the location of the presumed incident, and the defendant said yes, he was. Testifying officer gets asked a few related questions before it's the defendant's turn on the stand. Oh boy. Prosecution asks basically the same questions as the officer did and asks a question about if he lived in the same area. The defendant responds that no, he was not at that location and does not live in the area, even though he had confirmed both previously in the video and in previous questioning. So the judge takes over and rephrases the question. Insert a 5-minute argument between the defendant and the judge where the judge asks, "How do you not know where you live?" Because the defendant kept going back and forth on if he did or didn't live in the area. After so long, the judge had had enough and sends him back to his seat where the defendant proceeds to whip out his phone and starts texting someone. The judge at this point has had enough and sends the jury back to the deliberation room for about the third time since the trial started that day. All of this, of course, happened the second time we were supposed to be there for trial. The first time the defense lawyer had brought forward new evidence and we were dismissed until a further date for the prosecution to go over it. Said evidence were photos of damage to his clothing and bruises he claimed to have gotten that day, but really could have happened at any point in time, as those were clothes he wore to work at, if I'm recalling correctly, a factory, and the photos were not taken until days after the apparent incident. Additionally, the victim claimed her phone had been taken by him after the incident when she left at her car at a later point. He claimed that even though he already had his phone and at no point in time had given it to her, the phone was his. All right, I don't know if it's the ADHD brain or whatnot. The second half of that story was in my ear and out my mouth, or in my eyes, out, whatever. The first part, though, how does a person get to the point where they will be on the stand and admit to one person, like, I was there, I lived there, and then another person comes up and they're like, I don't live there. You're on record. There's a person there, not necessarily typing now. I think stenographers are different. I have a friend who is one. I should ask. But just... Story 2. I was in a courtroom when the attorney for someone's trial didn't even bother to show up at all for the person's trial. The defendant said that he had never even spoken to his court-appointed attorney, as he had called multiple times and never received a call back. The judge was a D to him and refused to drop charges, actually laughed at him when he asked for acquittal, and then reprimanded him for not trying harder to contact his attorney. That judge gets paid a bonus for every conviction and has a 100% conviction rate. My friend's ex was appointed the no-show lawyer at first, but complained that he wouldn't respond to her calls at all, so they gave her a new attorney who also wouldn't return her calls, but there are only 2 of them in our jurisdiction, and they wouldn't let her complain about inadequate counsel. Where I live, it is very common for the public defender to not speak to their clients at all before trial, or only 5 minutes before trial. Friend's ex met with her attorney 5 minutes before court. He told her he was not going to even try to defend her, refused to ask for an extension to subpoena witnesses. He walked up and talked to the DA and informed her they made a plea deal but didn't ask her to agree to it. When she got called up, the attorney told the judge she had agreed to a plea. She has major anxiety and was so terrified she didn't argue. The judge didn't even call her by the correct name. That same attorney couldn't even remember which case he was representing when he came up. All of the cases he brought up were plea deals. He doesn't actually defend his clients. I was watching a Judge Judy case the other day, and the defendant stole the plaintiff's dog while she was in the shower after she paid him $500 for the dog. She wanted the dog rather than the money. He was ordered to return the dog. U.S. Marshal was to go pick it up. She dismissed the court, and the guy turned to the plaintiff and told her she wasn't getting the dog back. Judy stopped, spun around and said, "What did you say?" He lied and said, "Nothing." He then lied about where he lived when she asked. She recalled the case and said that the show would not fly him home until the dog was given to a neutral party who could take the dog back to the plaintiff, and that if he refused to return the dog, he wasn't going home. Another Judy case was the defendants were accused of stealing the plaintiff's purse. They denied it. As the plaintiff was listing the items in her purse, she mentioned some expensive earbuds. One of the defendants mouthed off that the earbuds weren't in the purse when he took it. Judy cackled like a hyena while the co-defendant gave him a stink eye. All right, first off, good on Judge Judy. You know, I know people give her some guff, but I've got to appreciate her in those little moments. Let's go back, though, to the judge who gets a bonus for every conviction. Is that true? Because that feels like a rumor that would crop up. Be like, oh, he convicts everyone because they bet he gets a bonus for every conviction. But if that actually is happening, if a judge is getting a bonus for every conviction, I feel like that is the wrongest thing. What could be more wrong? The possibility of that being true infuriates me.
Story 3. My grandfather was a lawyer, and once in the 80s he defended a man for car theft. The trial had barely begun when the plaintiff stated that it wasn't just the car, but also the keys that were stolen. At this point, the defendant loudly said, "Well, that's what you get for leaving them on the porch." Needless to say, my grandfather lost the case and his client went to prison for 3 years. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Story 4. Allow me to share with you the thick needle defense. My father, about 20 years old, goes to court for a speeding ticket. When asked to explain himself, he states, "Your Honor, I have a thick needle." Basically, his defense was that the odometer needle on his truck was thick, so he may have been going 30 miles per hour or 35 miles per hour, but he couldn't tell. Because of the thickness of the needle, you see. The judge, stifling laughter, told him to get out of his courtroom.
Back in the day where you could just say something kind of, snarky or witty or come up with some dumb excuse and the judge would laugh and go, get out of here, you. I think that still probably happens here and there today, but only for YouTube videos and stuff to make people feel a little better about the oppressive system that is slowly consuming our happiness.
Story 5. I'm no lawyer, but I can think of 2 stupid ways I've seen lawyers blow cases. One, I sat on a jury for a murder, robbery, kidnapping trial. One guy shot another guy, etc. For nearly a week, we heard testimony from cops and experts, and even the accused himself. It likely seemed that it could have been a self-defense case and the days of testimony were pointless. The prosecution for the state went on, but finally revealed after nearly 4 days that the accused was already a felon due to evidence tampering. Ultimately, we had enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the accused did use more than justifiable lethal force, and the jury did convict of murder, but all other charges were acquitted because of an extremely sloppy prosecution. A slam-dunk charge was not even brought up, that of a felon being in possession of a firearm. That alone would have sent the guy to prison for several years, but the sloppy prosecution never once mentioned it. 2. A friend was involved in a legal separation instead of a divorce. Both parties agreed to the division of the only asset between them, the house, and they went their separate ways. The guy foolishly decided to go the cheap route and use a public online website to determine the value of the house, and his very new and inexperienced lawyer never suggested paying for a house appraisal. The girl's lawyer, of course, never brought it up since it's not the lawyer's job to tell the other lawyer how to do their job. The girl got an appraisal done and knew the true value of the home. When the house was sold and the separation was final, the guy lost more than $20,000 in equity because he didn't have an appraisal that proved the actual value of the home. Story 6. I actually have one. Not a lawyer, but I'm a receptionist for a bankruptcy attorney. At the initial meeting with the judge and creditors, the debtor was asked why she didn't file taxes. Debtor responds with the fact that she doesn't make enough taxable income to file taxes. Debtor also continues with, "I make money under the table and I'm paid cash." Needless to say, we're going to be investigating this.
Why are people so bad about incriminating themselves in courtrooms? I've heard enough stories like this where I'm sure some are made up, but even if just a couple of them are true, come on, lying isn't that hard.
Story 7. A few years ago, I had been given a parking ticket. To be fair, it was deserved. When the police officer wrote the ticket, he reversed the dates, as he had apparently recently moved to the country from the United States, wrote 6th of February instead of 2nd of June. So when I turned up to contest it, the judge asked if I was in this particular place on the 6th of February. I confidently said no, I wasn't even in the country on that date. I proved this with my passport and airline tickets and was let off. Story 8. Back when I was a law student, I used to hang out at the court just to watch the proceedings. There was this guy representing himself on a speeding ticket. He asked the police officer what the weather was on that day. I guess he figured that the ticket was written 2 years ago and he wouldn't know. Turns out the cop actually had that in his notes and told him the exact weather and temperature. The guy then said that it's not true and gives his own account of the weather and says that if the officer lied about the weather, then the court can't trust anything he said, and so the ticket should be dismissed. The judge, just looking a bit bewildered at this ridiculous argument, pointed out that he didn't actually have anything to show that the weather was as he claimed, and also pointed out that the officer was a sworn friend of the court, and so he was definitely to be believed unless evidence proved otherwise. Guy tried to make the same argument again for some reason, and the judge just put a stop to it. Story 9. There's an old attorney saying, "Don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to." I saw it firsthand when I was a witness in a case concerning an eviction. I was head of maintenance and was on the stand. Our side finished with me, and the other side's attorney got up with a look like he got me. "Didn't you say that the reason you had to rekey the front door of the unit was because you had to have access to an electrical panel which served areas outside of the unit?" "Yes. Take a look at this photo. It shows a door on the exterior of the building which is marked electrical. Isn't it true that the access to the electrical is on the outside of the building?" I pointed out that there are 2 electrical panels, one on the outside for the elevator and kitchen, and the main panels inside of the unit for the entire quadrant. The judge looked up at the attorney and said, "Any more questions?"
Man, attorneys, you gotta do a better job than that. Like, if that was my attorney who made the, clearly didn't understand what he was asking about, I would very immediately be like, "Are you sure you want to be doing this case for me, buddy? Do we need to call someone else? It's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed, but I don't want to go to jail."
Story 10. When I was 16 or 17, both my brother and I had to go to court for tickets, skateboarding without a helmet. One of the dudes called before us was there for a charge of minor in possession of tobacco, and this dude walked up with a ciggy tucked behind his ear. He had apparently turned 18 since being initially charged, but damn, the judge was not happy with him. Also got chewed out for wearing shorts to court. If I recall correctly, he pleaded guilty, so he probably figured you don't really need to look nice if you aren't fighting it. Story 11. I was in the gallery of a civil court case, business partners dissolving their partnership. This was a hearing of defamation. On cross-exam, the defendant's attorney got the plaintiff to admit that some of his statements were outright false. He then blurted out, "It's my First Amendment right to say anything I want even if I know it's not true." He lost his full-time job, police officer. Story 12. I was in court for some traffic tickets. One of the guys was there for a possession charge. Turns out he was turning himself in for something else and forgot to empty the pot out of his pocket. This was in California, but before it was legal. Another time I was in court, still traffic stuff, but there were a bunch of us from the jail. The judge starts by saying, "If everyone pleads either guilty or no contest, you can go home with time served." Then he called the first name the defendant stands. "How do you please?" "Not guilty," he says. We all groaned. Story 13. I was arrested for criminal mischief. The judge told me I needed to get a lawyer at my own expense unless I could prove I couldn't afford one. I couldn't and said that I didn't know what I did was a crime. He gave the typical response that ignorance of the law is no excuse, so I replied, "Then why do I need a lawyer?" He looked stumped, and all he could think of was, "Because I told you to," then gave me a public defender. Story 14. Back in my late teens, I got pulled over for turning around in a school parking lot. Long story short, they found a weed pipe, and the officer asked me if I could give some dealers' names when the detective got back from vacation, and in exchange, he would let me go on the spot. I said sure and went on my way. never having the intentions of ever talking to the detective, and so I ducked him for 9 months, at which point a warrant was sent out for my arrest. I turned myself in, got a lawyer, and the lawyer tells me they don't even have my pipe in their evidence locker. I got off scot-free, but the judge gave me a very dirty look.
Well, if there's any lesson to be learned, it's to just avoid dealing with the law for as long as possible, and hopefully they'll screw up and you can get away thanks to their incompetence.
Story 15. I can believe most of these just based on what I've literally seen with my own eyes. One of my old friends had to go to court for a traffic ticket with a pill fob full of crystal around his neck on a lanyard. Another guy I knew had a court case for no operator's license and drove himself there with 3 unregistered firearms in his back seat. Story 6. One court case I heard about from a mate happened in the Rust Belt. Small court, and the judge begins to complain of a pot smell. No one owned up to it. Then someone screamed as a literal skunk came flying through the courtroom, people jumping up and screaming as the poor bastard ran through people's legs. Apparently the skunk got in and was chilling in an air duct, but then got startled, and the rest is history. Story 17. I wasn't involved in the trial. I was just riding the bus. 2 women were sitting on the bus across from me. One was a junior in a trial, and the other one was her friend. They were talking about the trial, and I couldn't help but overhear what they were saying as they were talking quite loud. By the time I got off at my stop, I knew what the trial was about, who the jury foreman was, who the judge was, and even which courtroom the trial was being held in. I got to work and told my boss, and he had me call the courthouse and tell them everything. At first, the lady who answered the phone thought I was pranking her or something until I told her the judge's name and the jury foreman's name. Her voice got kind of tight and angry sounding as she told me that she would inform the judge. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but attended some courts when I was in law school. In this case, Person A had allegedly hit Person B in the face. Person B claimed to have had to go to the hospital and claimed about 5,000 euros in damages. Judge, you claim to have 5,000 euro in medical bills? Can you show them to me? Because the only thing I can find in your file is a 50 euro cab bill. Person B's lawyer proceeds by completely freaking out and yelling at the judge like, I wasn't there, ask my client. The judge said it all.
I get that being a lawyer is probably tough. You know, that's a stressful job. You got to take in so much information. You're arguing in courts and stuff. But if you're frustrated to the point where a judge asks you like a question about something and you're like, I don't know, ask my client. Why are you talking to me? Like, take a vacation, buddy.
Story 19. I was on a jury, and at the start of it, the judge addressed the defendant and mispronounced his last name. The name started with the letters Rob. The judge pronounced it as Robe. The defendant corrected her with, it's pronounced Rob, not Robe, as in I'm going to rob you. The look on his attorney's face was priceless. Story 20. My brother went to his hearing after speaking with his lawyer. He told his lawyer he was going to plead guilty and take the plea deal. When the judge asked him how he was going to plead, he looked at the judge and said, I plead the fifth. He refused to answer any other questions and kept repeating the same sentence. His lawyer was peed. Story 21. I arrested a defendant on multiple bad checks. I even had copies of the checks to show him. He said he never had a checking account at that bank and pleaded not guilty. I had him sign the 4 pleas, 1 for each check, and gave him a hearing date. His not guilty signatures matched the checks perfectly. Story 22. I worked in HR for an industrial plant. We had an employee who claimed he suffered a back injury so severe he couldn't do light duty seated in a chair at a desk, couldn't climb the short flight of stairs to the office level, etc. He sued the company and our insurance company for an exorbitant amount. Our attorney hired a private investigator who filmed the guy helping his mother move and do repairs, including carrying large pieces of furniture and a large porcelain kitchen sink up a flight of about a dozen stairs. When the PI played the video in court, the guy's attorney said to the PI, "You filmed my client on Mother's Day? Have you no shame?" The guy not only lost the case, he lost his job and was charged with insurance fraud. He had to pay his attorney too, which I think had to sue the guy to receive payment.
You dare to film my client on Mother's Day, the holy day that we all agree we do not film people? How dare you, sir? Why, my client may go to jail for what he did, but you, sir, shall burn in hell for recording on that sacred day.
Story 23. While not exactly a blown court case, my dad has a great friend from law school where they're like brothers. He had a court case where he was protecting someone who was accused of being the head of a brothel. The closing argument he had, I think, was he was holding a dating facility where a young eligible army, by the way, I think it was an army, but I'm pretty sure it was a service-like thing. Men can date Russian women who want to marry to get into the U.S., or something along those lines. He was acquitted of all accounts and lived his days off with his hot Russian wife, who couldn't talk back, as if she did, they could get divorced and she deported. LOL, he was the case. Story 24. I represented myself once in court for a high-range speeding ticket. Still lost my license. The court didn't have jurisdiction to turn that over in my country, but got my ticket reduced by 90% and court fees waived. Story 25. My brother's best friend is a criminal defense lawyer. He's basically the Irish version of Phoenix Wright, but with more brains. He can't tell this story to others without cracking up. So back in 2009, he was defending an absolute bozo from a DUI charge. He asked the witness, who claimed she saw the bozo swig a bottle of liquor behind the wheel, "Did you at any time see Mr. Defendant drink while driving?" Bozo raises his hand, and I crap you not, looks the judge dead in the eyes and says, "With all due respect, Your Honor, it was only 4 sips." My brother's friend just face-palmed as the guilty verdict was passed. Story 26. I am not a lawyer, but I will share this story anyway. So we went to the court as law students to see how it worked, and we went to watch a trial. On the side of the accused was an old and experienced lawyer. I expected him to do a good job of defending the accused, but as soon as the trial began, he started arguing with the judge and insulting him. Judge warned him not to do this again, but he continued insulting him. After that, the judge gave him a fine, but he still kept insisting on the judge. After that, the judge was forced to remove him from the trial. But just before the old lawyer left, he turned towards us young law students and he told us, "I did this so that you students can see what happens when you argue with the judge. Don't do this when you become a lawyer." Story 27. This isn't exactly someone throwing a case, but it is funny and idiotic, so it fits the spirit of the episode. A defense lawyer in the town I live in was overweight and had a tendency to lean forward. Our courthouse didn't have microphones at the time, so this was done by most attorneys so they didn't have to yell as loud to be heard by the jury, judge, and so forth. One day he leans too far forward and tips his table over. I don't know what the verdict was for his client in that case, but I'm sure he could have filed for a retrial on account of incompetent defense if he was found guilty.
See, you say that he could have tried to go for a retrial because of my lawyer's incompetent. Look, he fell over like that. I just feel like that's the kind of guy he'd get up and be like, "No, Your Honor, I am but just a simple country lawyer who does not abide by the rules of tables," and that's what's in my mind. I don't know if it makes sense. I really just wanted an excuse to do that.
Story 28. This happened to a friend of mine. He was rushing his girlfriend to the hospital because it was faster than waiting on EMS. He got pulled over for and arrested because being a dangerous driver, 60 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. At court, the prosecutor subpoenaed the ER doctor as an expert witness on the seriousness of her burns and needed him to say they weren't that bad and didn't need medical treatment. They looked worse than they were, but ended up just needing to be cleaned and wait till heal. But on the stain after he said, "I swear to tell the truth," he looked at the judge before the prosecutor could say a question. "Your Honor, as I told the prosecutor, I'm a trained expert witness that my boy," Kitty always called him as a term of endearment, and points to my friend. After paper shuffling, the entire prosecutor team went from tan to ghost white for their entire case, rested on him saying what I said above to clean it and let it heal. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.